The 9:15 staff meetings on Monday mornings seemed unbearably early to the group of summer camp counselors that I was a part of growing up in Michigan. Now, that work schedule of a camp counselor seems like a luxury that I did not appreciate back then. In those staff meetings, my friends and I listened to our first boss give instructions for the week of camp ahead. And interlaced with the planning and admin work were words of wisdom, encouragement, and faith. His name was Larry. And for those who knew him, they can testify to just how remarkable of a person he was. Larry was a high school summer counselor and a soccer coach during the winters, but in the summer, he was the activities director. On Sunday evenings, he would lead a Bible study called Pizza with Larry, and he would teach us about God's love, encourage us to reach our potential, counsel us to keep our lives balanced and stay connected to our faith, family, and friends. During those formative summers, I'm afraid my friends and I took much of this wisdom and advice for granted, for the most part. In my 14-year-old mind, at least, there would always be another Pizza with Larry, another camp counselor staff meeting to learn, to pay attention, and to really apply all that he was trying to teach us. In December of 2016, shortly after I started working here at St. Mark's, I was flying back from Wichita, Kansas, after attending Larry's funeral. I remember looking out the windows as the plane descended through storm clouds. The clouds seemed to last forever. And while staring out the window, I was lost in my memories, trying to recall all those lessons that Larry taught us, half regretting that I did not appreciate them more in the moment, and half endeavoring to do better and follow that advice in a way to honor Larry. These past few weeks, as part of a requirement for confirmation, our youth confirmands had to meet with either me or Barkley to have a conversation with the priest. And in those conversations, they ask any questions that they had about God, the church, confirmation, and, well, life. And in every one of those conversations I had, I shared wisdom about God and life that I had learned from Larry. Apostolic succession is so much more than just to do with bishops and the laying on of hands. It's one follower of the way, taking what they have known, experienced, and learned about God's love and passing it on to the next. Jesus said, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you." That was today's gospel lessons, and don't those words sound familiar? It's almost as if we heard them recently. Just a few weeks ago, on Maundy Thursday, we listened to these words in the Maundy Thursday gospel. "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another." Those words were so similar, in fact, that when I sat down to write this sermon, I had to double check to make sure I hadn't called up the wrong lessons on the lectionary page. They actually aren't the same readings. They're from two different chapters in the Gospel of John. This week is from chapter 15, but it's actually part of the same discourse in that gospel, in that Jesus starts that discourse at the Last Supper way back in chapter 13, and that's where the Maundy Thursday reading is from. This section of the Gospel of John is sometimes referred to as the final discourse, and it's one of my favorite parts of the Gospel of John because it shows Jesus' humanity and his divinity all wrapped up together exceptionally well. This is the part where Jesus goes on and talking about, I dwell in you and the Father is in me and I'm in the Father and you are in me, and it just goes on and on for chapters. On the one hand, Jesus is trying to tell his apostles of his imminent passion and death, warning of betrayal and denial. He knows time is short, and so he's really trying to impress on those oft clueless disciples that they have to love one another, and they have to show that love through self-giving service. That's the divine Jesus in this discourse. And on the other hand, the human Jesus demonstrates that all too familiar tactic of rambling and repeating that all of us go through when we're trying to put off saying goodbye. Whether it's a parent and child's last conversation before dropping them off at college, two friends talking into the wee hours of the morning, the final night before travel and departure, or the conversation with a loved one as they slip from this life into the nearer presence of God. The apostles experience a pattern of life that we all can relate to. They were with Jesus day in and day out for years, trying to learn from and live in community with the God of love made incarnate in Jesus. Most days, they thought that Jesus would always be with them. They probably took that assumption of Jesus being with them in that way for granted. At the Last Supper, at the Passion and Death, they realized what they had and what they lost. Suddenly, everything, every word, every action in those moments near the end, those all becomes filled with meaning and poignancy. It's as if they get it suddenly. And they go through grief and mourn all that they lost and did not realize that they had. I think many, if not all of us, can relate to the apostles' experience. And it teaches us the importance of gratitude in our spiritual lives. We need to recognize in those moments, at that moment, where it can be so easy to take things for granted, recognize all the blessings that we have. And it would be great if we all left here today with the reminder of the spiritual benefits that come from counting our blessings. If we all left with just a little bit more gratitude. But nothing about gratitude is unique to following Christ. It's definitely part of following Christ. But Christ calls us further. Jesus commands us to love one another as he loves us and to lay down our lives for one another. He wasn't just talking to the apostles, he was talking to you and me, each of us. I don't think many or all of us are called to be literal martyrs, although there have been literal martyrs and there still are literal martyrs for the faith. But we are all called to lay down our lives. And we see how to do this by reading this Last Supper Passion Gospel on this side of the resurrection through the light and from the vantage point of Christ raised from the dead. That familiar experience that we share with the apostles, where you have that unexamined, take it for granted phase that suddenly leads to a poignant, meaningful, filled phrase when faced with a death or an end. Well, it doesn't stop there. It gives way to a third phase, to pass it on. As that old Camp Mitchell song goes, it only takes a spark. It only takes a spark to realize that the best and only way to honor and give thanks for the gift and knowledge of God's unconditional love for us is to pass down that knowledge and experience on to others. Tell the story. Share your wisdom. Act kindly and encourage others. I told Joanna the other day that I don't think that there really are any original or unique preachers. Preachers, well, we're all just taking the preachers that we heard and that formed us, imitating them a bit, combining in our part, contributing our share of our voices, and then sending that role of preaching on to the next. That's how it is with sharing the news of God's love too. God's commandment of radical love spread out from that table where bread and wine were shared and feet were washed, and it ripples out further and further through each person who has encountered the fire of God's unconditional love and has not kept it for themselves, but shared it with another. We carry the love of Christ that was made known to us by those whose wisdom, kindness, and encouragement allowed us to see, feel, and encounter the risen Christ, and we lay down our lives by doing the same for others. Amen.